I'm Tim Ventura, here with Colonel John Alexander. John has worked in a number of roles in the U.S. military, including being a specialist in the development of non-lethal weapons. I called John recently about an unrelated project to the anti-gravity research, but I'd found that he has an incredible background of knowledge, both in terms of the way these projects are handled in the military, as well as the types of technology we're looking at for the future. Can you hear me okay, John?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your new book, Winning the War. You've mentioned that to me on several occasions, and one of the things that it seems to be pertinent to is the current situation in the Middle East in terms of helping to keep the peace, as well as the future of technologies to enforce justice, I guess, while not injuring people in the way that older weapon systems have.
Well, probably a bit broader. Winning the war addresses several issues. It does run down high technology and weaponry, specifically from non-lethal to hyper-lethal weapons. But areas that may be of direct concern or interest to you, I have a chapter called Six Sigma Solutions. Now, my view is that we could win the war on terror, but we choose not to because we won't. The steps are politically incorrect that we would have to follow. Having said that, I do hypothesize that we have entered the next world war, and it is religious. Don't see any easy way out. But I don't think the way out, if there is one, is military. And in Six Sigma Solutions, specifically, I address technology because it says that we have got to get off of petrochemicals as our primary energy source.
Definitely. I've seen a number of different solutions proposed, ranging from zero-point energy, free energy, all the way to beta voltaic stimulated decay nuclear technologies. Many of these are currently in the development stage by various groups, but it doesn't look like anything has really rolled forward yet to displace oil, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's unfortunately correct. I believe, have the technology to transition to a hydrogen economy in 2 to 3 decades. And yes, it does take that length of time, and that's basically to replace the infrastructure. And getting the hydrogen necessary is more than a trivial matter. Some people think it's apparently overly abundant, and it certainly is abundant, but using the energy to get it out is non-trivial. But I also address the issues that you've mentioned, specifically looking at high-risk, high-payoff technologies, including zero-point energy as one of them. Another one would be looking at fusion, looking at high-density electromagnetic, what Eric Davis talks about, wormhole engineering, and other renewable sources of energy. But we have just got to shift.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And, hopefully the hydrogen work being done by General Motors will pay off eventually in terms of at least consumer automobiles, and I'm sure then military vehicles and industrial shipping, long-haul trucking. But looks like maybe consumer vehicles, just the general soccer mom driving the kids to school thing, will probably be first.
Well, the biggest problem is making the decision that we're going to do it, and do that as a concerted effort, not as a fifth wheel.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I'd hoped, as I look at it, I've been doing research into a variety of different anti-gravity, field effect propulsion, and some novel aerodynamic systems as well. And a lot of these are based on electromagnetism. And so one of my hopes is that if we're able to move to electric vehicles, it may be a short step from there to powering some of these other technologies.
Well, and I think what has to happen and should have happened at this point is to get into concerted funding by the government in these high-risk, high-payoff, because the potential is so great. And it takes a lot of engineering, There's a considerable amount of work to be done, but we certainly have not put the national will behind changing the energy paradigm, and that's just essential um, because we cannot continue to rely on the Middle East. It's just too unstable.
Absolutely, that completely makes sense. Well, with non-lethal weapons development, in the short term at least, do you see that technology moving forward as being a way to give our troops a lot more freedom? Um,
Well, I'm certainly an advocate for non-lethal weapons. Recently, the Council on Foreign Relations held the third study. I was on the first one, and in this one, they came out with a proposal that said we should move from tens of millions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars, which would be another big step forward. By and large, the military has picked what we call the low-hanging fruit. In other words, the beanbag bullets and the low kinetic energy stuff, and they're now bringing in tasers and things like that. But we're now looking at some more esoteric systems that require considerably more research. You may have heard of the area denial system, high power microwave one, that we're actually going to take from engineering development and send it directly to Iraq. So that should be kind of exciting.
oh, okay, okay. I'd always heard that these systems move forward in time of war, so it makes sense that the development would be expedited.
Yeah, well, it was supposed to be 5 years from fielding, but what it means is that they will be taking prototypes over as opposed to completed systems, and there is some risk in that. But I think what this system is going to do, there's something in non-lethal weapons called the rock test, and that's what the troops say because many of them, the rubber bullets and those sorts of things, have a very limited range. Taser is basically at 21 feet. And what they want to do is have weapons that give them a margin of safety. In other words, is it further than a young adolescent can throw a rock, which is about 180 feet. So we'd like something that can reach out and touch people without putting our folks at risk.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the spin-offs of the Hutchison Effect, and I recently did an interview with John and then a gentleman named Ted Gagnon down in Southern California, is looking at a variety of these effects that may apply in many ways to non-lethal weapons. The Hutchison Effect has also been really interesting because it appears to have a large anti-gravity effect. From what I've been able to see, I know there have been rumors that it could have been possibly even a psychokinetic effect. I looked at it as possibly harmonic frequencies, just a very complex scalar effect. Do you think something like that, if it was harnessed, might be able to be used for something like force fields, perhaps?
Well, the problem there is that's a huge if. As you know, I funded John's work more than 2 decades ago. I helped him do some of the pioneering stuff. They were to redo some experiments, and when we came to do the show and tell, where we had independent body of observers, absolutely nothing happened. Now, I had worked around him enough to have come to the conclusion that I think at times something happens. The problem is getting that something under control so that it can be replicated. And John sometimes has success with that, and unfortunately, it doesn't often happen when there are independent observers around.
Definitely. Well, if it was able to be harnessed, that would definitely be a big step forward for my research in terms of the largest lifter that I have now lifts just about a pound of payload, and they're really lightweight and very delicate. And so those have been things that I've been trying to work on in terms of just strength and more power. And one of the things I've noticed is that as much fun as they are, they're very linear. And in a way, they would almost be better for development by an aircraft company, a place that had the resources and the engineering power to really sit down, invest some time and money in it, and develop something. I'm not sure if that'll happen because the development cycle for aircraft is so much farther along, and in some ways, the lifters don't have that many more advantages than aircraft do. But at the same time, having seen some of the videotapes from the 1980s, John was able to have, I think at one point there was a 70-pound bowling ball, 80-pound, I believe actually maybe it would have been a cannonball that was
Well,
levitating.
many, there were many things that were lifted. One of the most interesting aspects of it was they were not all metal. In other words, this wasn't a big magnet because there were things that were non-ferrous that were being lifted and floating about. But he also got a variety of effects. There were items that were, you know, had destructive consequences, literally evaporate. They had items that, for instance, milled bars that had been, you know, engineered for specific tasks. The strength is known, and it would be exposed to the field, and one end of the bar would be as hard as it normally is, and the other end would be like butter, and you just couldn't explain that. There were items that twisted with multiple substances, from aluminum, wood, iron screws. I mean, it was just bizarre the way you'd have this, you know, range of effects. But again, when you said, okay, let's watch this and see what's happening, so you could try to put something together, it just you know, never wanted to comply, and that was one of the reasons why I asked John the question about whether or not he was part of the system.
Oh, sure. Sure, that would make sense. Well, and it must have been very frustrating also, because when you're working on a project, putting money into development and research and study, to have effects, but then have them be unexpected and unreplicable, in a lot of
No,
ways.
let me give you one example. We had a major show and tell scheduled, and John was set up to do that, and I had flown into Vancouver specifically for it. And the day before, they had set up the experiment and had it running and started getting effects, and they shut it off and didn't touch it. No tweaking the knobs or anything like that, thinking that, okay, the next day we'll come back in, throw the switch, and we ought to get the same thing that we got, just a day prior. And the problem is they turned it on and nothing happened. And then eventually the thing that happened was they literally burned up the machine. It caught fire, and we had to wait a couple of days while they were getting some new parts to, continue with the demonstration.
Oh, okay. Well, in terms of the psychokinetic aspect, that's something that I know virtually nothing about. But I've wondered, remote viewing has been becoming more and more well known, I guess, and I understand that the military had done some research, at least, into that in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s. Do you think that
This
might have any?
continued through the mid-90s,
Oh, okay.
and it was a 20-year project.
Well, I'd wonder if that might have any applications, at least in terms of it seems like the idea of cross correlating some of the remote viewers' predictions. I'm not sure if that would apply to anything like psychokinesis, but if it was possible to develop a program like that, it might offer some very unique non-lethal weapon solutions.
Well, again, in winning the war, I addressed in the Six Sigma solutions, there were two sub-elements in the chapter. One of them had to do with strategic application of remote viewing. But there I was talking primarily about the ability to access data. As we know, one of the biggest problems in counterterrorism is knowing when and where and what's going to happen and being at the right place at the right time. And the classic intelligence tools are problematic at best. For everything they've done, nobody's ever been able to get inside of Al Qaeda, for instance. And so having something that could predict events or tell you when and where to look would be tremendously advantageous. The other piece that is mentioned in winning the war is the use of PK that we've been talking about, or psychokinesis. Now, I think that would have, more direct application from a weaponization standpoint.
Sure, sure. Well, in terms of, and again, I should apologize for being stuck on force fields. It's running in the back of my mind at this point. One of the experiments that I'd read about a while ago was Giovanni Modini's and Eugene Podkleanoff working together, and they'd published a report that apparently several major aircraft companies have looked at, and the idea behind it was to create a beam of directed force. And I guess they used a superconducting ball with a spark running from the inside to the outside, and for whatever reason, when it discharged, much in the same way a Van de Graaff generator would, supposedly it produced around 20 pounds of force and was knocking things over in the lab. I wonder if something like that might be useful in terms of future technologies, both in terms of transportation as well as just moving people back, I guess, in a non-lethal weapons situation.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I am not familiar with the specific report, so I really can't comment on that adequately. We are looking at a wide range of weapons that put out force, including acoustic systems, to do just that, have the ability to keep people back, because that is one of the major tasks, particularly in what we call the peacekeeping or peace support operations, where you have crowds that are ostensibly friendly, and that you have a requirement to use force or keep things orderly. And so you want to use the minimum amount of force necessary, and you just can't do nothing. So, and anything that can project and apply force is probably going to be something that would be worth looking at.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This subject is especially important to me at the moment. My brother's actually shipping out to Iraq as soon as he's done in boot camp. So probably in the next 2 months or so, he will be there. I believe he's working with cavalry. So
Where is he?
well, right now he is at Fort Knox, and he's just in cavalry training school.
I asked my son has just completed the infantry training and is in jump school at Fort Benning as we speak. So.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, definitely wish him the best from me, because this is a difficult situation over there at best. But now, in terms of things that we're likely to see in the future, do you think that the 20 to 30 year time scale applies to some of the more esoteric technologies, or do you think that the breakthroughs are really hard to predict there?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, it's not a simple question. Predicting breakthroughs is always difficult. Having said that, I think the biggest issue is not so much the breakthrough as it is getting started and convincing the powers that be that they ought to be putting adequate funding. If you don't fund these programs and really get this off the dime, then you're not going to get the breakthroughs at all. So that's why I think the initial issue is to make the decision that we really need to change the energy paradigm and commit the resources necessary to make that happen.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, in terms of, I guess just more off the cuff questions, this may sound kind of odd, but I've met a lot of military and ex military personnel. both people who are have directly been in the military and then peripherally related in terms of contracting. And one of the things that I found is that despite the security classifications, there are always rumors that float around that no one can really substantiate. And I'd always wondered if you'd heard anything interesting that maybe wouldn't have fit in the book, but would have just been interesting in terms of things you weren't able to substantiate, but would have been worth following up on if you'd been in the right place at the right time.
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Oh, well, the idea in mind was I've heard from two separate sources, and it's difficult to put any credibility in it at all. But I've heard rumors about a UFO supposedly stored at Edwards, and my thought had actually been that perhaps it was just a prototype device of some type that was being tested. But it would be interesting to see if you'd ever heard rumors about things like that, or the maybe.
Well, I don't know how you can't hear the rumors. And I guess here I would say that my bias is against the probability that these happen. Now, I would tell you that even some friends of ours that who deal in these communities. I mean, this is obviously always a topic of interest and great debate. And I come down kind of lonely here because I come down on the fence. Certainly UFOs are real. I think that's proven beyond, the shadow of a doubt. But I do not support the notion that we've, reverse engineered it or anything like that. And my premise there is that the world is in such critical shape at the moment that if we had had this kind of capability, certainly would have used it by now. I mean, I cannot imagine, given the status of the world, that it would remain under wraps. And I've heard all of the arguments about we're going to take over the world and da 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 da, and I just do not agree with those.
Sure. Well, it would seem odd that if we had this technology, that it wouldn't make it into a field capacity. I guess one possible limitation there would be simply if it's so advanced or so outside of what we currently know that we weren't able to take it apart and reverse engineer it.
Well, that is the counter argument, and I have reason to, my personal reason to believe that that is not true. Like I say, having said that, I have a number of friends whom I respect greatly who, serious scientists, who believe that it is accurate. So that's just an area of, that's the only suggestion that would make any sense, because the notion that we had such a system, had reverse engineered it, and for some reason are keeping it secret just does not make sense. In that, I think the world is tremendously unstable at the moment, and therefore having something like that, keeping it secret and not used for a potential future gain, would be a very high-risk strategy, because I'm not sure there'll be a future if we don't get some of these things sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just in terms of, in terms of other new technologies, actually, I'd meant to ask about nanotech, because I think that may become more and more pertinent in terms of developing these next generation, both in terms of non-lethal weapons, and if author Ray Kurzweil is correct, it will kind of reverse engineer everything, all of our current technologies. I was wondering if you had looked into nanotechnology at all, maybe as a 30 to 40 year solution for some of these technological developments.
Yeah, well, again, winning the war does address that, and I say that things in the future are going to be, small and smart. And certainly the advances that are taking place in nanotechnology are, among the foremost. But I think some of these you'll see combinations, of course, of classic physics and biology. I think some of the approaches will be in the biological arena. As Benford said, 20th century was the century of physics. The 21st century will be the century of biology.
Oh, okay.
And
I've never heard that quote before.
nanotech is an essential ingredient in that.
Yeah, I was amazed to see the recent information release. I believe the military is working on an exoskeleton to allow soldiers to pack more equipment. That's
Well, that's a bit of a sensitive issue with me. More than a decade ago, I was one who went in and briefed the king of the infantry on a system that is far more advanced than what they're hypothesizing now, let alone working on. I think they've been pretty slow to really focusing on this and making the advances necessary. But say we're going to go that way, I think is almost certain.
Oh, okay. Well, is that something you could talk about a little bit, the system that you'd proposed, or is that still under classification?
No, it never was classified. The issue or the basic concept was developed by a scientist at Los Alamos. We happen to have called it Pitman, but it was a powered exoskeletal system that you could probably take direct hit from a 50 caliber armor-piercing round, and the entire body was powered up. You had to have assistance in moving through actuators. The long pole in the tent was exactly what we're talking about, is energy, in that in talking to any users, none of them wanted to be tethered. In other words, you could, get a lot of this power out, but you had to plug them into something, and soldiers did not feel comfortable, having a cord that went back someplace where you could be unplugged, or the notion of the old knights where you could just tip them over and they can't get up. But given the kinds of threats that we're facing, we think a powered exoskeletal system, they've gone initially to steps in powering sensor systems, so you can get more distributed information to the soldier. And we had suggested that you might want to start on the other end. If you look at the injuries that happen to soldiers, I'm not talking necessarily combat injuries, but an awful lot of people are injured just jumping off of trucks when we move them from one place to another. So part of the idea was that we would increase the strength in the lower legs. It also gives them an advantage in individual mobility. Excuse me. Having to move around, and particularly as weapon systems have gotten heavier and heavier.
Yeah, definitely. It makes sense that they wouldn't want to be tethered as well. And, one potential, I guess, it would take a lot of development even to be sure if it would work. But one of the things I've been following is beta voltaic power cells. And they've had a tough time because in some ways they violate some very basic assumptions about nuclear decay. But I guess the underlying idea is that you can increase the speed of decay and turn a radioisotope like strontium-90, I believe that was the one that Paul Brown was researching, into an actual sustained electrical emitter. The benefit being that you could have something the size of a cell phone battery that would be able to power both a suit and a soldier's, if they had a non-lethal weapon that was electrically based. Interestingly, I've seen one of these in operation, and when it was powered up, it wasn't self-sustaining, but it did ring like a bell. It definitely produced more energy than it otherwise would have. So perhaps technologies like that might help make these things a reality.
Well, they're certainly looking at a wide range of capabilities because, as we said, for so many things, power is the long pole in the tent.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we're almost out of time, but again, your book is Winning the War, and I would just like to say thanks for taking the time to discuss this with me. It's been an enlightening experience.
Okay, well,
And
good luck.
okay, well, thanks again.
All right.
Bye.